Good morning and welcome to a very special Black Press USA, blackpressusa.com, and the National Newspaper Publishers Association special interview with Dr. Camille Cosby. Joining me is our president and CEO, Dr. Benjamin Chavis Jr. We are live. We're going to be talking with Mrs. Cosby. The interview, Dr. Chavis, was pre-taped. For those who are watching, we will be discussing it, you and I, throughout the morning. And Dr. Chavis, I know that you have your thoughts on Mrs. Cosby and the plight of Dr. Cosby himself in prison, and it's good to have you this morning.
Well, thank you. Again, I want to thank you, Stacey, for your leadership in working to get this historic, unprecedented interview with Dr. Camille Cosby. On behalf of the Black Press of America, the National Newspaper Publishers Association, this is what we do. We not only report the news that's important to Black America, but we're an advocate for freedom, justice, and equality for Black Americans and for all people. We're at a pivotal moment in American history when our country is at a racial divide. There seems to be widening. The bridge is not, the gap has not been bridged. We have another police murder in Atlanta on the eve of this interview. So let us get right into it. I'm so proud. And of course, Dr. Cosby, Bill Cosby, I visited him a couple times in prison in Pennsylvania. He languishes there unjustly. And I'm so proud that we have this interview from Dr. Camille Cosby. We're going to hear directly from her. And I hope all of our viewers will pay attention to her words, her insights, and her wisdom as one of our senior sister leaders in the world.
And they should know, too, that this interview was done in conjunction with Frankie Darcell. So you'll be hearing Frankie Darcell as well doing the interview.
Very good. I think we should get right into it.
Yep.
Frankie Darcell with you, and so looking forward to this portion of the show and our guests. And I will introduce my guest coming up in minutes, but I am so excited to have with me as well Stacey Brown. He is with Black Press USA. Stacey, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Frankie. Good to be with you.
Good. Now, you are the man when it comes to Black Press USA around the country. Tell people who you are.
Well, I am the senior national correspondent for the Black Press of America, which consists of 230 African-American owned newspapers and media companies. And we also do a live stream almost every day now, Frankie. We're working hard, but nobody works as hard as Frankie.
Listen, so you have covered a number of topics, and clearly through the advent of everything that you guys are doing with the Black Press USA, COVID-19, how it's affecting African Americans. You're doing podcasts as well, and clearly the protests that are going on. And you've also covered extensively the Bill Cosby case from literally almost start to conviction and moving forward, correct?
That is correct. We were actually at jury selection in Pittsburgh for the first trial, and we didn't miss a moment of testimony through both trials, and of course the verdict and sentencing as well. One of the stories, Frankie, real quick, I like to tell about the sentencing of Bill Cosby. He actually called me on the way to court and sat outside the courtroom on the cell phone in the car as the court was about to go into session. And we're talking, and I said to him, I said, Mr. Cosby, don't you have an appointment? He says, Judge O'Neill can wait.
So, wow. Right. So listen, our guest, we're going to introduce our guest coming up in just a few minutes, Camille Cosby. People have been waiting to hear from her.
Mm-hmm.
It's a conversation with Camille Cosby. Stacey, you're going to be joining me with that conversation, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And Frankie, I'm so glad that we were able to do this, because people have criticized Mrs. Cosby unfairly, I say, for not being so public in her defense of her husband. But you and I both know. I mean, you've talked to Andrew Wyatt, the family spokesman, a lot. You've had him on your show. You've stayed plugged in on the whole Cosby situation, and you know she's working as hard as anyone, but behind the scenes to help her husband.
So we're going to speak with Camille Cosby coming up in just minutes. I'm joined with my guest as well, Mr. Stacey Brown of Black Press USA. It's going to be a conversation you don't want to miss. And welcome. It is Headlines. My name is Frankie Dartel. Welcome to this edition. What's happening in and around the city of Philadelphia, the region, the state, and the world. I do want to take, and I take all the time, great voices and great pride in the voices that are being heard, even when we respectfully disagree. It's a forum for collective ideas and changes each and every week as we have discussions recognizing the changing world that we're in. In today's climate, it's no different. It is necessary for the discussion we're going to have today. My guest is Ms. Camille Cosby, the wife of Bill Cosby. And let me say this before that we get started with this conversation. As a result of the ongoing legal and appeal issues relative to Mr. Cosby, there are areas we're not going to discuss today. So let me say that up front. And I know you all want to hear some of that. I know you do. I know you want me to go there, wherever that there might be. You know, if you're a frequent listener, thank you for making us the #1 show here in the city of Philadelphia. That's just not what I do, the reality show stuff. Never has been my thing. So let me start the conversation by welcoming Ms. Camille Cosby to Headlines. Ms. Cosby, how are you?
I am doing fine.
Welcome.
And thank you for giving me this forum to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us. We've been looking forward to hearing from you as well, and in preparing for today's show and researching your background. You're one of America's, more specifically, one of Black America's most accomplished, iconic women in a number of areas: education, business, philanthropy, the arts, family, and the like. And it appears that you really look for no accolades, and you don't look for applause either. From Washington, D.C., born of wonderful parents, earned a degree from your dad from Fisk University, your mother, undergraduate degree from Howard, your sister. You studied philosophy at Maryland, a PhD and a master's degree from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. You've done quite a bit. So as we think about that and your contributions to HBCUs, the millions of dollars that you and your family have gifted to, you know, just brighten the minds of African Americans, that's who I research. That's who I've seen from afar. And now I have the opportunity to have you here. Who is Camille Cosby?
Very good question. Sometimes I don't know, but it's a fact. But I am a person who is not afraid, who does not fall victim to the fear mongering that is consistent in our media. Is excuse me, hold on.
Mm-hmm.
And who is determined to achieve egalitarianism, who is determined to enable others to move ahead with education, who is, my husband and I, never asked those students who you referenced to pay us back for the scholarships they received, for the private funding they received from us to go through secondary and advanced education and trade school education. I am a person who is not, as you said, looking for accolades for helping others. That is coming from the heart. That came from my husband's heart as well. We cannot be frozen by fear, which I think has been going on too long. The apathy has been thick. And when this revolution began with the death of Mr. Floyd, I said, at last, at last, there was just too much apathy. We allowed too many corruptions to continue. We were entertained by them. We were told we couldn't do anything about them. But now it is in that last time.
Wow. Wow. And you use the term at last. Let me go back just a little bit, and I've since ordered it. I read some of the excerpts from the book Television's Imaginable Influences, and you talk about the influences, particularly as it relates to television, and how they impact people of color, specifically African Americans, and for the sake of this conversation and where we are as well, men. Do you believe that some of what Black America, Black folks, the community, are impacted more by what we see in the media, what we see on television and the like, or what we see in our homes and what we see in our neighborhood?
You know, the sense of vision is a very strong sense.
Mm-hmm.
So if we see something repeatedly, then we believe it. We have a tendency to believe it without questioning it. We're also programmed to conform in thinking.
Mm-hmm.
In our public schools and private schools, we're not encouraged to be critical thinkers. As a matter of fact, that's another topic I'll get to in a minute that pertains to history.
Mm-hmm.
But back to the imageries that you are referring to, those are repetitive imageries, and they've been going on since the advent of television, but they were also existing prior to television with paintings, with illustrations, with statues, the images of sacred figures, spiritual figures done in the imageries of white people. The actors, the African-American actors, I only speak about African-Americans now, not other ethnicities, but the African-American actors wanted to work, obviously, and they really compromised themselves when they allowed themselves to play out those stereotypical imageries, which are all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're everywhere. And then you have a tendency to believe, well, that's who you are as an African American. And the thing that Mr. C did, and I want to insert this, throughout his 51 plus years as an entertainer, he never dehumanized African American people. He never used the word nigger in his performances or on his TV shows or any movies he had done or the animation he had done with the Fat Albert characters. He humanized African Americans, and he tapped into the commonalities of humanity, and he highlighted the word difference as being positive rather than negative, so that we would honor and respect differences amongst humanity. And by the way, in light of what I have stated about particular white women who have accused Black men of sexual assault without any proof, I want to emphasize that, I have to focus on MeToo and what I think is their convenient, intentional amnesia about that history in this country, which has caused the deaths of maybe thousands of Black men throughout the years. It is intentional amnesia. I want to reemphasize that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just because you are female does not mean that you tell the truth. The gender does not define you in terms of honesty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, Stacey, you had a comment?
Oh, absolutely. And along those lines, Mrs. Cosby, we know that the Me Too movement was started by a Black woman, but it was pretty much hijacked by white Hollywood. I would like for you to speak a little bit more to that, because I think there is something profound about that we don't really hear from African American women who say they are victims. Certainly not nearly as much as we hear from white women who say they are victims.
Absolutely. And what I would say to those white women, when you look at what women are on welfare, who comprise most of the welfare monies, those are white women with children, which eliminates the myth about how much white men are very caring about their families. The people who are probably believable pertaining to issues of sexual assault are those in those shelters. Those people are much more believable than this. This is a mob of women who are getting lots of attention, but once again, not dealing with the history of what white women have done particular white women, not all white women, but have done to Black men pertaining to endangering their lives, not only causing deaths, but causing beatings, causing mutilations like with Emmett Till, causing incarceration. They are deadly, and they're just carrying out the dirty work for the white men who have their own agendas pertaining to those particular Black men.
Yeah, and hasn't that spilled over into journalism? We talked earlier about journalism and fake news and things of that nature, but we also are not getting both sides of the story. And I know you spoke out about that in the past. Can you kind of reiterate that about the journalism aspect of it and not having both sides of the story?
When I was researching my dissertation about the imageries that are affecting young African Americans and their perceptions, self-perceptions, at that time, media were owned by about 12 or 13 entities. Now it's down to about 3 or 4. And all of those 3 or 4 are right-wing. So they will never give you the other side of the story pertaining to an African American person. And they have a lot of power as long as people believe them. They're out of work. Their livelihoods will end if people don't believe them. They're in the business of believability. That's why they do a lot of repetitive stuff. But they will not give you the other side of the story because their agenda is to continue to stoke the fires of racism, to continue to stoke what has been tried and true for centuries of divide and conquer tactics. Mm-hmm. So no, you're not going to get the other side of the story from them.
You have, Ms. Cosby, been at the ivory tower of the media business and negotiated and did business well at that level. Thinking back, how far away do you believe we are from a very strong African American on network? We know that we've had it on both television and on the radio side, but still it continues, especially it seems like in some cases, the bigger it becomes, the more controlled and mainstream it becomes.
Well, also the people in it are complicit in that, mm-hmm. because they do show programs that are filled with stereotypes. They do couch their stereotypical messages with spiritual messages so that it will be acceptable, particularly to Black women. Black people overall are very spiritual, conservative religiously. They have, people have to clean up their acts who are involved in all of this. Mm-hmm. They know what they're doing, but they're just looking at the goal, and that is to make money, mm-hmm. and to be perceived as good people while they are really exploiting people. So I think that we are far away only because I don't know very many people who I've seen throughout the years who really have the right intentions. To just do good work, to be respectful about others. Mm-hmm. I don't see that people are just so greedy. Greed mm-hmm. seems to be in the forefront of mm-hmm. just about everything these days, and it applies to Black people who have opportunities to really do something in a different way, in a very respectful way.
All right, I'm going to concede to Stacey after this last question that I have. Ms. Cosby, what would you say to people who will say, well, this goes back to the police brutality, and I hear it often in debates, including in the African American community. Well, until Black folks stop shooting and killing each other, how are you going to protest this and not protest that? What would be your response to that response?
Well, my response is that all Black people are not killing each other, number one. And I don't know any group of people in the world who are not guilty of killing one another. But those numbers, until we get rid of the corruption. For example, before the civil rights movements in the 60s, the drug market was big in the low-income Black communities. But as soon as the college white students, middle-income white students jumped into the protests, mm-hmm. then all of a sudden they were exposed to this drug marketing to sedate them. We've got to really do a lot of cleansing here in terms of dealing with the truths of what our behaviors are and what our agendas are. It is hugely problematic that there are Black people who will kill other Black people, but that's a self-hatred, and that's a hatred of being Black. We have to just do whatever we can to undo that, whether it's through education, whether it's through changing our attitudes towards those people, to show more care for them, to nurture them from an early age so they feel valuable. There are a lot of things that can be done psychologically and sociologically, but we must start doing them instead of just pushing them aside and mistreating them so that their behaviors become dangerous later on.
Yeah, and so Mrs. Cosby, again, I want to go back just a moment just to complete this Me Too portion of this conversation, because I think it's so important. It seems like it's a conversation that no one really wants to have objectively. And I sat in that courtroom for two trials, and I'm not asking us to relitigate the trials of your husband, but I watched Me Too in action. I watched a so-called civil rights attorney offer a $100 million bounty for women to come forward. I'm quite sure that was not the idea behind Me Too. When you first heard of Me Too, what was your reaction to Me Too? I've heard people say, I've heard others, Black men say, it's a good idea, but it was supposed to be about making sure that women were not taken advantage of in the boardroom and other places. Did you think that this was going to be, could be a positive thing, Me Too?
It could have been, but it wasn't, and I don't think that was the real agenda. And as you said, it was started by a Black woman, as I understand it. She did start out with women in shelters. I mean, she had the right focus and intention, but then I think she got caught up in all of the public attention she was getting before it was taken over by white women. I think that it just became when the slogan became, "You must believe me because I am female," that's when they fell in terms of their believability from my perspective, because they know better. They know better than that.
Yes.
You just don't believe somebody just because that person says it. You have to check out the facts. But they never did that. They just moved forward with all of their stuff about being female, therefore you should believe me. Now, with the women's movements that were tailgating the civil rights movements during the 60s, those women who headed those organizations were not Black or Latino or any women of color. They were white women. And so the behaviors pertaining to the entitlement, the white entitlement, that is just like that woman in Central Park who was going to falsely accuse a Black man of assaulting her, but thank goodness he saved himself by videotaping her. It was that she tapped into that white entitlement. She felt that she could get away with that because so many have.
Absolutely.
And to Ms. Cosby's point, just kind of as a footnote, it's interesting. And I just happen to be an amateur steward of history. I just love history. And when you mentioned the women's movement, of the 1960s and the like, my mother actually worked with Shirley Chisholm when she was running for president. She worked on her campaign when we lived in New York. And one of the challenges for that movement was when people or women of color would come to the table, it was such a difference in terms of what the life experiences were that it was hard to be able to come up with a, quote, women's movement, because Black women had already been doing the jobs and having the experiences that other women in this country, more specifically white women, didn't experience.
Absolutely. Black women have always worked. They have always worked. My mom worked. My grandmothers worked. No, that wasn't new and isn't new in our culture. And in Shirley Chisholm, I felt that I also interviewed her many years ago. She was a magnificent woman. But remember, though, that she really took a beating in terms of what they were trying to do say about her, made fun of what they said were her bad looks, that she wasn't intelligent. They went all over the place. And those women pertaining to the groups we're talking about did not protect her. They did not. They left her hanging out there.
Right. I just wanted to ask Mrs. Cosby, she's authored, and you alluded to this, several books and edited books. Are there any plans in the future for more writings, Mrs. Cosby?
I hope so. I really am beginning to think about that. Our daughters are really pushing me towards it. They say, Mom, it's time for you to start doing other things other than dealing with lawyers and corrupt officials within the criminal justice system. And I said, well, this is taking up a lot of my time. But anyway, I am thinking about that. I do want to, by the way, relaunch Fat Albert for Mr. C, the animation, and the apparel that will be attendant with that. Because those characters, you know, animation does influence people's thinking. I mean, look what Walt Disney did with that minstrel character, the Mickey Mouse and all of that. And then the characters that were evil were always dressed in black, or something black was on them. But it is important that people see people of color in all forms of entertainment, but in a positive way. It's too easy to do the stereotypical stuff. It's too easy to use the word nigger. It's just too easy. It is cheating. It is cheating oneself and cheating others, because whatever is put out there publicly is what people worldwide will think, will perceive pertaining to you.
You know, you mentioned George Floyd, and when I think, even as a mother, that even at the time that the last breath, he called for his mom.
That's right.
And mothers around the world, regardless of your hue, regardless of your socioeconomic status, you had to feel that. And you talked about images as well, Ms. Cosby. Today's climate, Black Lives Matter. You talked about time. And May, I think it was in like May of 2019 as well. And you write about this, and it was in one of the tweets in terms of the stereotype of either Black men, and you talked about fearing Black men, or the fear of Black men, the stereotypes, the judicial systems, and the like. And one of the, not to kind of paraphrase, you made reference to the brutal black buck with more than a soundbite or tweet. Here's an opportunity for you to elaborate on that term, the brutal black buck, the fear of African American men, or the fear of African American men.
Well, African American men have always been portrayed as brutal black bucks. That connects to this ongoing problem, which, by the way, is interconnected with police brutality, that numerous white, very hateful, very disturbed white women have claimed sexual assault from African American men, and many of those men were hung from trees, as we know. We also had that horrible massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, when a mob of white people converged on a black community, Greenwood, that was self-sufficient, by the way, economically and educationally. But that massacre was sparked by a white woman who claimed that a black man had sexually assaulted her. You have the criminal justice system, which has been corrupt all over the place, all over the nation, which has carried out the dirty deeds that the police, who are bad, have done against people. But black men, when you look at the movies, if you look at the TV shows, you will see that they have been portrayed as super hyper-sexed men. The black women, by the way, have been portrayed as loud and asexual. Then you have the criminal aspect that has been put on the black male. You have the laziness, the lack of intelligence. I mean, there are numerous stereotypes about them, but the brutal black, for some reason, racist white men are very fixated on the sexual aspect of black men, and have purposely distorted and lied about all of that.
As I ask my last question, and I'm going to pass the baton to my colleague that's joining us today, Stacey Brown from Black Press USA. But as we talk about that, and we talked about the brutalization in your comments, the judicial system itself, as it relates to particularly Black folk in poor and disadvantaged neighborhoods. You talked about education. We're going to get back to that. You said you mentioned it later. But is there a sense of isolation? And what happens as it relates to police and brutality, in your opinion, between those who live in challenging communities and those Black folk who have, quote, made it?
No, it applies to all of us. It doesn't matter who you are. Our son was killed by a white racist man in an upper income white community. If you are Black, you are not safe. And I have found, it really is disgusting to me that so many African Americans who are at least middle income, they feel that they are safe if they don't move off the dime, if they don't protest against something, if they don't challenge something, if they just not try to stir the water, so to speak. No one is safe. None of us are safe from this. And we have to collectively not only protest, but we must boycott and we must vote. And by the way, I am imploring young people to not only register to vote, but to vote in these upcoming elections.
Right.
It is imperative that they not think that their votes don't count. And that's why the enemies of justice, the enemies of humanity are working so hard to be certain that people of color don't vote. So they've got to wake up and do that.
Great.
Stacey?
Yeah, thank you, Frankie. Mrs. Cosby, and I want to continue on that topic that you were just talking about voting. In 2018, you wrote a very compelling op-ed that ran in predominantly African-American owned newspapers throughout the country about judges and district attorneys. Now, we're in an election year and people are really putting the importance on the presidential election, but I want you to expand on the importance of these so-called down ballot races that include state lawmakers, district attorneys, and judges, because oftentimes they are overlooked. So if you don't mind, I'd like you to expand on the importance of that.
Super important. It's very important for all of us to understand the powers that the local officials have. We have to focus on them in terms of voting. We have to focus on the state officials. We have to focus on the federal officials. We, the people, are the very fears that the hegemonic criminals have, and they always are looking at us to see what we're doing, and work very hard to quell any movement for egalitarianism, for any kind of justice. I think that we have a tendency as a people, not as African Americans, but as a people in this country, to overlook the importance of those local officials, because they are the ones the prosecutors, they are the judges, they are, in many instances, responsible mayors. Okay, we have mayors who have a lot of power. We have to look at every single person who is an elected official. We cannot overlook any of them on any level.
Yeah, and
we have to do our research, not just think that because someone is a Democrat that's okay, because all Democrats are not okay. And we have to just look at people in terms of what their records are and what they're doing for people.
And Mrs. Cosby, again, staying with that theme for a moment, we see those in the, particularly in the hip hop communities, talking about holding the vote hostage. They have certain demands that candidates should meet before before Black America casts their vote. Can you speak to what that means, holding the vote hostage, if you will, as they've been wording? We've had Diddy and others worded that way, that they will hold the vote hostage. How important or how dangerous could that language be?
Well, if they're holding the vote hostage in terms of boycotting a person, then there isn't a reason to hold the vote hostage, because that person is already who he or she is. You just have to select another person to vote for. I think once again, it's very important for all of us to be educated about the backgrounds of each one of these people. And there must be alternatives to the ones who are not trustworthy, who do not have a record of being fair to people. We just cannot say, okay, I'm not going to vote for you until you do this and do that, because once that person is in there, that person could change all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you touched on with Frankie about the unfortunate murder of your son. And we see George Floyd's situation, Breonna Taylor, Michael Brown, Sandra Bland, and others. And understandably, we are upset, we're angered by it. But unfortunately, you can truly empathize with those mothers of those victims. And with that said, what would be your message if you were sitting down with the mother of George Floyd, the mother of Breonna Taylor and Michael Brown and Sandra Bland? What would you say to them? Because you lost a child to racially motivated violence.
Yes, but you know what? I have watched the Floyd family. They're doing the right thing. They are fearless in terms of pursuing justice, as much justice as they can obtain around the loss of Mr. Floyd. There isn't anything I can say except to say that it is what they are experiencing, a very painful experience. But as they go along, as long as they're able to just chip away at the injustice, as long as the cop who killed him, Mr. Floyd, is not, well, he has already been arrested and charged, but he must be convicted. That will help the healing for that family. It is very, very important, as it was to my family and me when our son's murderer was arrested and convicted. But you have to be certain that the police department is not trying to appear to be sympathetic. You have to be certain that they're doing the job that they should do, and the prosecutor, so that the justice can be obtained. I don't know what I would feel if the murderer had never been caught. But I know that during that period, I had to work with that LAPD very closely because they wanted that case to go away because they had just lost the O.J. Simpson case. And you have to be diligent about staying on top of not only the law enforcement, but you have to stay on top of that criminal justice system. Very, very, very tenaciously.
Absolutely. And I'll ask you one more, and we'll turn it back over to Frankie. You know, you guys were, I Spy started in the 60s, right? And we had the civil rights movement at the time. We saw the marches and we saw the demonstrations. This time, it appears a little different. It appears actually to be getting some results this time. What do you believe needs to happen next to keep this momentum going and to ensure that change is not just temporary, but more permanent?
I'm hopeful for that because I am 76 years old. I came through the 60s with very much, my husband and I very much a part of the 60s. Even Mr. C was on Nixon's enemies list during that time for 4 years and being harassed by federal entities per Nixon's instructions, along with over 100 other people. You really must understand that our entities that are supposed to protect us, whether they're on the federal level, state level, local level, they're not in the business of protecting us. You have to force them to do what they're supposed to do. But since you brought up I Spy, I want to make it known that was the television show that launched Mr. C's career. But many of the southern states would not air it because Mr. C had a primary role on that show, and it was not a stereotypical one. And so they just blocked it out. The importance of what is going on now is, I think we have to look at what caused the ignition of this movement, because people were apathetic up until that time of Mr. Floyd's death. But there have been many black men who have been killed by police who are bad. What was different about this one, I think, is that there was a collective negativity that what comprised of the coronavirus, comprised of the stay-at-home restrictions, the social distancing, people getting sick, people not having access to health care. So I think collectively that helped people to wake up. It's like Elizabeth Catlett, she is deceased now, but she was an activist, a fantastic sculptor, and she was once asked, what do you want people to think about your art? And she said, I wanted to wake up somebody. And it's like everybody united, no matter what the ethnicity was, but they united for a common purpose to protest against police brutality. And those who had never been subjected to police brutality were when they were participating in this revolution. And that changed a lot of people. It even changed the corporate media in some ways, because for once they were giving factual information about this revolution. And I just think that the tenacity, not to be deterred or distracted by the usual infiltrators, because that was so common during the 60s, during those different protests. The infiltrators are planted so they can quell the movement. So as long as they are aware of all those things, and they stay on point and they continue on with this, and they need to not let up, and I'm hopeful that they won't.
All right. In a conversation with Camille Cosby, also my guest, Stacey Brown of Black Press USA. And might I say, as a footnote, as we make this transition, 76 and fabulous, Ms. Cosby.
Thank you for that.
You are so welcome. So I want to transition, and you made mention as well of education when we talk about the contributions made to Fisk University and Spelman College. My daughter, actually, I know your daughters went to Spelman. My daughter, undergrad, 2018 graduate, and went to school at BU in Massachusetts, so it looks like we're following you. $800,000 to Meharry Medical School, $700,000 to Bethune-Cookman University. That's just the short list. But this coronavirus as well, Ms. Cosby, surely showed the differences between city, urban communities, and suburban communities as it related to technology, resources, and education. Most of the suburban schools were able to keep doing what they're doing because of the advent of computers, smart boards, and the like that they use every day. Urban communities, and more specifically poor communities of color around the country, it took them 2 or 3 months to catch up, if they were able to catch up by receiving computers, which they were able to do here in the city of Philadelphia. When you talk about the disparity in education, and education is one of your passions, moving forward, what do you say to families, particularly mothers, who are trying to get their kids the best possible education they can get them in the climate that we're in?
Okay, there are a couple of things that I would focus on. Number one, we need to demand that history is taught differently. The content of the history books need to be purged from all of the public schools and private schools. They are not telling the truth, and there are glaring omissions, because those books, from the beginning of schooling, which can be kindergarten or first grade, they are forming our self-perceptions and the perceptions of other people in the world. And they are lying. The number two thing is that nutrition is absolutely important for people to learn. Mm-hmm. And the brain and the body must be fed nutritionally. And even the food that is served to them in the schools is really junk food, full of all kinds of chemicals and sodium, etc. Children cannot learn if they're not getting the nutrition. And we know that poor children oftentimes are getting their only meals at school. Parents or guardians or caretakers must be absolutely tenacious about staying on top of the teachers and the administrators to be certain that the education is up to par. When I was in graduate school, one of the things I had to do was travel around the United States and observe different classes in mostly poor communities, poor Black communities, poor Latino communities. And it was just the administrative part of of these schools is absolutely important because that administrator is the one who sets the tone for the entire school system. And if the administrator is interested in the child, in each child, and is absolutely determined that each child is going to receive the best education, then that is what will happen in the school. But if the administrator is not interested, that person will allow poor teachers and poor teaching, and the children will be bored and they will not be willing to learn. Also, there must be a focus on the recognition of learning differences, that all of us learn differently, and respect that and provide special services for those who have a learning difference like dyslexia or maybe an ADD issue or whatever, so that all children will know that despite their learning differences, they can learn. It's very important for children to feel that they're not stupid. It's very important that they know that despite the fact they learn in a different way than maybe most of the other children in the classroom, that they're not stupid. They're different, but not stupid, and they can learn.
All right. What is it, as we get ready to wrap up, Stacey's going to have yet another question. What is it that you want our audiences to know that I may not have, or Stacey may not have asked? Is there anything that you wanted to share, that you wanted to say to the audience?
Well, I think I have really covered. I want to say one thing, though. Getting back to the issue of racism, our good friend, Dr. Alvin Poisson, who is a psychiatrist, he's in retirement now, but he once wrote an op-ed piece about racism, but he put it in the context that it is a dysfunctional form of mental illness. And it is. These people are crazy, and they're crazy in a way that is absolutely dangerous. Not all mentally ill people are dangerous, but these people are dangerous. And there must be a push for the world of psychiatry, which has been very complicit in racism. That's why they won't recognize what Dr. Poisson put out. But we must look at it as such. And when getting back to the history thing, another good friend, James Baldwin, who is deceased too, he once said, if you lie about me, then you lie about yourself. So that really encapsulates very succinctly how history is so important in terms of it being taught honestly.
Right.
Black people, African American people, cannot be influenced so easily by what they hear repeatedly, what they see repeatedly, because they're looking and listening at the enemy's work. They must go to alternative media. They must find other ways to get information.
Right. Ms. Cosby, my final question for you, to the point you just made, there's been a lot of, and we've talked about mainstream media and the like, and the question is always asked to Black America, well, what needs to be done? Is this a conversation for Black America, or is this a conversation for white America?
No, this is a conversation for white America. I mean, there was one time when I was interviewed on camera, and as soon as I sat down, I was in production for a television movie about two centenarian sisters, African American sisters. And as soon as I sat in my seat and was hooked up, the man asked me to define the word nigger. And I told him that he would have to go to his own people to get that definition. And if that was the way he was going to go with the interview, it was over. White people must face their own history. A white historian, Dr. Howard Zinn, wrote The People's History of the United States, which is the most authentic book of history written by a white person that I have ever read. And because it's from the mouths of the people, all kinds of people, ethnically, religiously, whatever, culturally. No, they have to have that discussion amongst themselves. Let's not forget that the enslavement of Africans also meant that those Africans were sex slaves. Because there are so many gradations of skin colors amongst us, not due to people who have mixed parentage, mixed race parentage, I should say, but because of the genetic code being set during the time of slavery, we have to really, they have to go back to that truth and go from that point 400 years up to now. All right, Stacey?
Yeah, and just to, and thank you again, Mrs. Cosby, just to expand a little bit on what you just said, you know, your family spokesperson, Andrew Wyatt of the Purpose PR firm, and you, your husband, both have made it a point. Sometimes even you've gone out of your way to include the Black press and Black-owned media and Black reporters like Frankie and myself in any releases, interviews, and projects you may have. Can you again speak to the importance of why that has been a theme of you guys to include Black-owned media?
Because we are Black, number one. Number two is that the Black media have always been treated as less than by other media. My husband, from the very beginning, even beginning with I Spy, has always used his position on each show that he has done, each eponymous show as well. He has always opened the doors to the unions for the first Black stuntman, that was Calvin Brown, who started it on I Spy, only because he demanded a Black stuntman instead of a white man in blackface with an Afro wig. The first Black makeup artist in the union, the first Black photographer, that was the iconic Howard Bingham, the first Black hairstylist or hairdresser, the first Black wardrobe person. He was the one who did that. We must support our own, but not the ones who are duplicitous amongst us, because we're not monolithic. There are bad ones amongst us too. Mm-hmm. But those who really deserve an opportunity, but the Black press has always been important to us. Always.
Well, we appreciate you, and we certainly appreciate you taking out the time today. We know that you're not normally out in front of things when it comes to the media. You enjoy your privacy and you protect it well, and we respect that.
Well, I thank both of you for giving me this opportunity just to say some things that actually been cathartic for me. So thank you.
Absolutely, you are absolutely welcome here anytime. It is an open mic for you to call back, for sure.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.
You have been listening live of a recorded interview, actually, of Mrs. Camille Cosby. And I think it's important to note that, and she said it there at the end, but she also called back to say how cathartic that interview was for her. Dr. Chavis, you have spoken to Mrs. Cosby in the past. You have visited Bill Cosby in prison a few times. What is your thoughts on the words of Mrs. Cosby today?
Thank you very much. What we just witnessed, what we just listened to, was the reaffirmation of the Black family, was the reaffirmation of Black genius, Black intelligence, Black diligence. I thought it was a great program where Mrs. Camille Cosby covered a number of subjects. She's an educator. She's a dynamic visionary. She refuses to be suppressed by white supremacy. She refuses to be held hostage by the so-called MeToo movement, or these other movements that try to attack and eradicate, emasculate, and castrate Black men. So I think that this is what the Black press does, Stacey Brown. I think that we provide an opportunity for voices like Mrs. Camille Cosby, not only to be heard, but to be advocated, to be supported. And we're going to keep the Black press open to the Cosby family. Yes, I've visited Bill Cosby several times in the unjust prison situation he's facing in Pennsylvania. And I think that I hope that in this time of strife, racial strife in America, that this interview will serve as inspiration to all Black families, to all Black mothers, to all our brothers and sisters who've been victimized by racially motivated police brutality and who've been victimized by white supremacy. I think that this is an uplifting moment on Sunday morning to hear from Mrs. Camille Cosby.
And Dr. Chavis, in a few moments we have remaining, Mrs. Cosby mentioned some things there, and you have to listen to her, right? Because there's been criticism, unjust criticism, that where has she been? You know, why is she not supporting her husband? To the contrary, she talked briefly about being immersed in the legal side of things when we talked about the book that she wants to write. She talked about wanting to basically do a tribute to Mr. Cosby by doing something new with Fat Albert. So I think she put, if you listen, and again, she's an educator, as you said, if you listen to her words, this is a woman that stands staunchly behind her husband.
Absolutely. Like I said, you know, every brother would want a wife like Camille Cosby. She stuck with her husband through thick and thin, and she's still standing strong for Bill Cosby. Bill and Camille, in my view, still represent the best of Black family, the best of the African tradition of working together in the village to raise the village. Bill and Camille have donated millions of dollars to historically Black colleges and universities, to other educational pursuits. And I can say without fear of contradiction that even today, I happen to know that Mrs. Camille Cosby and Bill Cosby are still looking for ways not only to fund those things that make a difference in the lives of Black Americans, but to make our world a better place. This interview, I hope, will not only have been seen live this morning, but I hope as we played over and over and over again. This is a primer for Black family life. When we say Black Lives Matter, we now know why.
Well, Dr. Chavis, you've been at the forefront of the movement for decades. You've seen this over and over again. And we asked Mrs. Cosby about what's different about this protest, but I think it's an appropriate question for you because you know you came up under the guidance of Dr. King.
Well, thank you. I will close out on this note. Uh, every moment of history is different. Every moment of history has contradictions and opportunities. But what's different about this moment of history is we have the potential for this moment to become another movement. We know about the freedom struggle, we know about the civil rights movement. I think when you see all these people marching together from the West Coast to the East Coast, from the North and the South, this is on the precipice of something to change America irreversibly, to deal with the racial divide finally, and to help prevent these senseless murders that continue unabated in America unjustly of innocent Black women, men, and children. So we have to stand up. And I'm thankful that as Black people are standing up and marching, they have been joined now by white people standing up and marching, by Latinos and Asians and Native Americans. The oneness of humanity is in motion. C.T. Vivian said the definition of a movement is when people move. And today in 2020, we are seeing millions of people move for racial justice, move for economic justice, move for health justice, move for environmental justice, move that every human being can be shown the proper respect and dignity that they're afforded by being a creature of God Almighty. Thank you so much on behalf of the Black Press of America, on behalf of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. Stacey Brown, you are a senior correspondent. Thank you for taking the lead to make this historic interview with Camille Cosby possible. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you for watching, everyone. Stay safe, and we will see you tomorrow when we talk to 3 more of our distinguished publishers at 1 p.m. right here, facebook.com/Black Press USA live. And then tomorrow night, we continue our celebration of Black Music Month with the great Mary Wilson, 7 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Good night, everybody. Good day, everybody.
Thank you.